Welcome back to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. I'm Tasha Anderson, your host, and today we're going to be talking about marketing and branding. I often joke that while I'm an accountant by day, a real passion of mine is marketing, branding, and really being able to tell your story and share with people that don't already know who you are what exactly you're about. So I'm not going to do this alone because I am the most unqualified chief marketing officer, even though that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. I brought along Steven Picanza. You are the co-founder of a new brand, and we're going to be talking about branding specifically, marketing, and how that can really be elevated in the nonprofit space. But before I dive into the conversation, because I have lots of energizing questions to ask, I love this topic. I just want to say thank you for taking your time out of your very busy schedule and talking to us a little bit more about your experience in this space and how organizations can benefit from it.
Awesome. Thanks, Tasha. Thanks for having me. I am stoked to be here. I have no shortage of things to say or energy to give off. So why let the audience wait? Let's jump into it.
Because I wanna talk about this concept. You've been on the record saying that you think most nonprofit branding is stuck in the 1990s. I would argue all branding is stuck in the 1990s, let's be honest.
Oh,
And what
yeah.
I'm envisioning, I bought this home, they renovated it. We've got the 12-inch square beige tiles, very
Yeah.
Tuscan vibe. And I'm like, this is amazing in the 90s. And I can remember fondly those times. I'm old enough to say that. So that's what I think about in my mind when we talk about 1990s. But what do you see when you think about 1990s branding or businesses or nonprofits stuck in that era? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about relevancy,
Okay.
and you brought it up too, right? The Tuscan theme of the kitchen, sure, it looks great. How functional is it? How relevant is it now? Does it actually attract the people that you want to be attracting? And I think a lot of nonprofits, and it's funny, I just got off of a discovery call with a new client that I have, a nonprofit, and their website is not responsive. It's hard to read. It's got way too many words. And it's not engaging enough. And there's really a hard time to draw the user to where you want them to go. So think about the kitchen, the Tuscan kitchen. It's got a
hmm
lot of big hardware and there's lacquer everywhere. And it's like, I don't necessarily, there's like a lot of cabinet space. And there's like, is this too much for what we need now? And I'm not saying that every brand needs to be a minimalist brand, but I think
hmm
that there's in a lot of, in chaos, we need to find clarity. And when I say the 1990s, a 1990s brand, or it could be a 2010 brand. It could be a
hmm
brand that was built a couple years ago. I think
Right.
a lot of amazing people who do amazing work often over brand.
Mm.
And it just becomes too much and it's confusing and overwhelming to whoever you are trying to attract, whether it's a donor, whether it's someone for your board, whether it's a person that you serve, right? We need to be more clear and we need to have clarity.
Okay, well, I have to ask this question then.
Sure.
So I am sitting on a board.
Mm,
This is, help for a friend. Not really, right? I live this experience myself, like where we have conversations about brand, specifically website, because I think a lot of people think that synonymously with
right.
website. Now we can debate that certainly. But the idea is that they have to develop a brand and build a website that speaks to all of the people that can come across an organization. So, different than the for profit community where you're just looking for that customer to exchange whatever it is you're trying to sell with, dollars essentially. The nonprofit world is much more complicated than that. So, when you talk about like the brand and being too much and lots of words, I think sometimes we fall into that trap in the nonprofit world because we feel like we need to speak to all of the different parties, all of the
Mhm.
different audiences. What would you say to that?
I would say that that is a big epidemic within the nonprofit space, right? Like there is a lot of great work that nonprofits are doing, and you could take any kind of nonprofit that's serving people. You often have multiple stakeholders, and
Mhm.
those multiple stakeholders need and want different things, right? If it's a
Mhm.
person that you serve, they need to know how to get in contact with you so they can take advantage of whatever service you have to offer. If it's a board member, they need to know how they can find their board meetings, from their last meeting, or, what the calendar of events is. If it's a potential donor, they need to understand the financial impact that they have on the organization.
Hmm.
If it's someone that they're looking to hire or a volunteer, right? So
Yeah.
like all of a sudden now you might have 6, 7, 8 different messages that need to be communicated with equal importance.
Yeah.
So, classic nonprofit or classic founder or classic person who is running, at the speed of light, wearing multiple different hats, is going to say, well, we got to put all that stuff on our webpage, and we're going to
Right.
put it on our homepage, and it's going to be a choose your own adventure, right?
Mad libs.
And right. And the first, and someone's going to go to that website, and the paradox of choice tells us that if there are too many options and too many choices, I don't know where to choose. I don't know what to point to. So I often come in and be like, well, what is the single-minded idea here? Like, what are we trying to communicate? And we could have different pages, and we could have different landing pages, and the
Hmm.
brand architecture can very easily serve all your different stakeholders. But we need to understand that we need to parcel it out, and we need to do some true segmentation and really do some true work to understand the messaging and the what that value proposition might be for each of those audience members. So instead of just trying to put everything onto that homepage and
Hmm.
roll the roulette wheel and hope that you land on, red 15, well, maybe we take a step back and say, let's build out a larger website, or build out a website that is just very easy to navigate, and the messaging is really succinct and clear on who we are talking to. Because I think a lot of organizations, for profit, non-for-profit, startup, whatever it is,
Yeah.
they assume that their audience knows who they are talking to. When I
Hmm.
think we need to just be more explicit. Hey, donors, this is for you. Hey,
Mm.
volunteers, that's for you. And have these corners, I suppose you could say, on the website that speak to that, particular cohort.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit to kind of messaging and tone, because I
Yeah.
think I've seen this play out in real life too, where nonprofits don't want to be, especially depending on their mission, finding that line between desperation and actual need and impact.
Sure.
There's also lots of conversation around, especially the programmatic folks that are, playing a part in the transformation of people's lives and not exploiting those stories or, sharing that. Whereas like the donors want to see that or need to see that for the impact, but how do you tread that line? I think there's a lot of just challenges in crafting the message and the tone, and I would even say identity of who we want to be and what we want to say. And sometimes the organizational mission is very, very needed, but it's kind of heavy. It's kind of dark, especially, for example, I work with an organization that talks about suicide prevention for children. So, how do you talk about that without being a little too doom and gloom, without
Right.
being too hysterical, even though we should be? Like there's some, it's complicated in
It
that sense.
is.
And I'm curious, like, what would you advise or suggest on how to get some clarity on walking that fine line between speaking our truth but not sounding too desperate, or especially when you're speaking to different audiences.
Right, too pessimistic or too optimistic, right? Like it
Yeah.
goes right there. It goes both ways. There's a spectrum here. I think something very important that you brought up, Kasha, is the idea of verbal identity. I think a lot of brands have a visual identity. We all know we have a
Mm-hmm.
logo and colors and graphical element, but there's a verbal identity that is
Mm-hmm.
sometimes even more important than the
Yeah.
visual identity. We relate to words, and
Yeah.
oftentimes words, unfortunately, are subjective, right?
Mm-hmm.
We how I process one word might be a little bit different than you. So we got to take that into account. I think also another important thing to think about when we are talking about verbal identity is the difference between voice and tone. They are
Mm-hmm.
not the same. I think a lot of organizations throw that word around, ubiquitous, or it means the same thing. There's not a fine line, but there absolutely is a fine line,
Mm-hmm.
right? My my voice sounds the same no matter what situation I am in. I still am going
Mm-hmm.
to sound like Steven Picanza. I have a New York accent. I talk fast, blah, 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 right? But my tone can be a lot different. How I speak to you is going to be a lot different than how I speak to my 3-year-old son. It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
a lot different than how I speak to a potential donor versus a board member that
Mm-hmm.
has generations within the organization, right? So tone is situational. Tone
Mm-hmm.
has to almost be defined by the situation. So a lot of times when
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with an organization, it's like, yes, we understand what your voice is, but like let's try to define what those different tones are, just so we could have a little bit more of a guideline, so we could have a little bit more consistency in the market.
Mm-hmm.
Because inconsistency is the biggest brand killer, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
more than anything else, it's being inconsistent. So how do we try to be consistent? So a lot of times I will be putting together documentation that is not exhaustive because you can't define every situation, right? But
Mm-hmm.
what are the most common situations that your nonprofit is facing? How should we speak in those terms? I think, yes, you can very quickly go to crisis communications as one specific tone. We have to be
Mm-hmm.
assertive and we have to, take, this stance, but there's a lot of other different types of tone we take. So then I think we peel another layer back, and you had mentioned this suicide prevention, and again, you can't just be all pessimistic, and you can't just be all
Mm-hmm.
optimistic.
Right.
Otherwise, you're tone deaf if you're doing that. I think,
Right.
that happens a lot.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to this idea of authority and empathy.
Okay.
This is a really beautiful harmony that I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
nonprofits need to understand. You are an authority in the space. You
Mm-hmm.
are providing services to individuals with X, Y, Z, whatever, for 50 years, and you have all these success stories or stories of helping, right?
Mm-hmm.
That just makes you an authority in the space. That makes you an organization that people perhaps in need or people in the community look up to, right? And we do it all the time with nonprofits that are in our community. Wow, you're doing such a great job. And you often peel back the layers, and that executive director was maybe affected by X, Y, and Z or whatever the situation is. This is where then you pull up the empathy, right? And the organization be like, but we understand whatever situation you are in, if it's a person that we serve, right? We want to be there as your guide. We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
necessarily be the hero. We want to be the guide. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
very, and so I often bring in the story brand framework. Story brand
Mm-hmm.
framework is a very popular, the framework within marketing coined by Donald Miller. You paint it back even further. It's the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
I going to go on record right now and saying I think 95% of nonprofits out there think they're the hero. They
Mm-hmm.
think they are there to save those people. Yes, that is true. From a messaging perspective, you are not the hero, they are the hero.
Mm-hmm.
The person you are talking to is the hero. The brand needs to take on the role of the guide, the
Mm-hmm.
trusted advisor that that person can go to at any moment and get what they need. That's where that authority piece comes in. So the messaging becomes, wow, these are kind of complex theories I just said. When it comes together, you don't even know it. It just sounds right. It just
Yeah.
feels right. It just resonates. It lands, right? And that's what we build upon. So I think a lot of nonprofits, are coming to the table with messaging, which unfortunately is backwards.
Mm-hmm. You said guide. Guide to who, right? Could be guide to a donor wanting to make an impact, a guide
1,000%.
to program participant or prospective participant, right?
Guide
That
to a
needs
volunteer, could be
support.
anything. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
It's funny we talk about voice and tone, and now that somebody shown some light on that for me, I see that so much in other brands now. I had a funny situation where I was working with this marketing consultant. I reached out for some copywriting work I was looking to
Hmm.
hire out. And he, of course, before we got on the call, he reviewed our website, did all the things as you would as a good marketer. And he gets on the phone with me or a Zoom call like this. And, of course, my personality is big and loud and all of the things. And I'm very casual. And he was so taken aback at the disconnect between my personality and what he expected of me, like who I
Oh, okay.
was and what I was going to say and what I was going to say about the company and how we identify internally compared to what was on the website. And he summed it up in a way that my personality is very approachable and casual and, um, you know, lively and all of these different things. But my website was written in a very, how do we say, maybe educational tone, like
Mm,
informational, educational. And I didn't know because I wrote the copy originally. I didn't know the difference between the two.
yeah.
But now that I've seen that, I see that so often in many, especially the nonprofit world, because I see people that I know actually work for that organization and how they self-identify internally and what their culture is like and what they're trying to do and the impact they're trying to have and the organizations they serve and all of these things. And because I have so many conversations with them. And then I look at their website, typically because these are master degree, like, a higher ed, accomplished, um, well-educated,
Smart people.
technical people that write like that, right? And
Right.
so when they're putting a website together, they tend to be far on the
Yeah.
educational side of things, for lack of a better word. And it doesn't translate how they show up internally in
Yeah.
their day-to-day work with the outside world. And like I said, I only say that out of conviction because that same thing happened to me. And so often now I go to websites, when people reach out and, want to talk about accounting services, I get on their website. Sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what they do. I'm not even sure. And then I
Hmm.
get on the phone with the individuals and it's a completely different experience. And
Yeah.
so I'm sure you have that experience. And I'm curious, like, how would some organizations, I mean, we're having this conversation, hopefully they have a level of self-awareness to do that. But what are some of the signs that there's like probably a disconnect or finding that voice or I don't even know how organizations can realize this is a problem for us, and then how do I fix that?
You know what the aha moment is? I speak to especially smaller organizations, smaller NPOs where they were, it could be a startup. I mean, really, it's a for-profit, nonprofit startup, whatever it is, when there's a founder and or, someone who created this out of the goodness of their heart,
Hmm.
right? Um, they think that the brand is that representation of them.
Hmm.
And I must say this 14 times a week to founders and to C-suite that a brand is not what you say it is. It's not
Hmm.
about you.
Hmm.
It's about them. A brand is what they say it is, right? So your brand, as much as you have the subjectivities of like, I want my messaging to sound like this and I want it to look like that. At the end of the day, it's not about what you want,
Yeah.
right? It's about what's going to resonate to your audience and what's going to, what's going to matter to them, right? So what are some of the signs? I think some of the signs are what you just said. Oh, I didn't realize that what you did. Oh, I didn't know that that was your guys' mission, or I didn't
Hmm.
realize that you helped my community, right? When there are those aha moments from the people that you are talking to, that's a really good indication that, hey, maybe you're not clear enough, right?
Hmm.
Like, think about when you meet someone, Tasha, and like, let's just say you're at a networking event and someone says, oh, hey Tasha, what do you do? And the first thing out of your mouth is like, oh, well, it's complicated. But what do I do? Instantly, psychologically, I'm like, checked out.
Yeah.
I don't care. Like, you've lost me, right? We have
Hmm.
3, 5, 7 seconds, whatever scientific study you want to read about how we can capture someone's attention. So the worst thing you could do is start out by saying, well, it's complicated. Well, why do I
Hmm.
even want to talk to you then, right? We need to be so clear, right? We need to be super clear with our messaging, with our intent, with what the
Hmm.
action is we want people to do. Listen, education and having an educational angle on your site is amazing if you want people to take that route and like consume that content
Yeah.
and do that. But if you have a ton of educational content on your website but you really want people just to call you up and book an appointment, but that's buried, well, you're sabotaging your business, you're sabotaging your mission
Hmm.
in that case, right? So I cannot stress enough how important brand clarity is, right? In
Hmm.
your message, in your design, in everything, because there are too many opportunities, too many brand touch points out there to screw it up. you
Mm,
know,
hmm.
and it's really unfortunate because I work with so many amazing organizations with such amazing missions, but they can't get out of their own way.
Yeah.
They cannot get over the fact that it's not about them. They think that they are the hero in the journey, and you're just not. So I've had these tough conversations. Like, I kind of have to sometimes call your baby ugly. But in order,
Mm.
right? But in order to move the organization forward so you can get more funding, you can serve more people, so you can really truly live to your mission, sometimes we have to take a step back or a lateral step and just reevaluate how we're presenting ourselves because we have one opportunity to make a first and lasting impression. We don't get a lot of many other opportunities. There's too much competition. There's too much content clutter. There's too much noise on the internet and in the world to take a chance.
Let's talk a little bit more about branding because something else that I've learned in my journey that there's, and you've hinted on this earlier, there's branding for, again, like in the nonprofit world, or I'm sorry, in the for-profit world, you think like marketing branding is geared towards like a customer. What I've learned, I've had to expand that to include potential employers,
Oh,
right?
sure.
And you mentioned with nonprofits, not only do they have employees and, let's just say those that utilize the program or customers, for lack of a better word, but they also have like donors and volunteers and maybe other people. What would you say is the relationship between strong branding and attracting all of those different things, not just donors or not just program participants, but how do we do all of those things?
It's a non-negotiable in
Hmm.
2025, 2026. It's an absolute non-negotiable that you are creating a brand, yes, so people that you serve understand, but you're creating a brand so you can attract. That's the end
Hmm.
of the day. You want to attract. You want to attract donors and volunteers and people into your orbit and into your community. And you do that by having a great brand and an even better brand culture. I was just
Hmm.
telling you I was on a discovery call or a kickoff call with a new client, a new project that we're working on, and one of the first things that we do is, yes, we're going to send out a brand questionnaire. I want to hear from each individual from the executive leadership team, from the board, but I want to hear from all your employees. And I legit, Tasha, told the executive director, he was like, well, we could just give it to the senior staff. And I was like, what about the junior staff? He was like, well, and I was like, no, we're absolutely going to give it to the junior staff. And then I was like, well, what about the janitor? And he was like, huh? And I was like, well, I mean, if your story and the janitor story are completely different, that is an issue. Everyone
Hmm.
needs to be able to recite the same story.
Hmm.
Everyone needs to know what the mission is and what the vision is. And it's not just words that live in a document on the bottom of your hard drive. That's ridiculous, right? We need to be
Hmm.
able to recite it at the drop of a dime. So I've done this before where I've told executive directors, go to the bank and take out $1,000 in $20 bills
Hmm.
and go around to your employees, slap a $20 bill on the table and say, what's our mission? And if they cannot recite it 100% verbatim, you take that $20 back and say, I'll come back tomorrow. You come back
Hmm.
tomorrow, $1,000, I will bet you $1,000 that they actually know what that mission is, right? And
Hmm.
that's then, and of course, that's a cheeky way of going about it. But the point is that there needs to be that alignment because you're building a culture. The culture is going to attract, and that is absolutely what we don't want to have a brand that's repelling or that's just shouting at people. We want to be like, well, what's going on over there? Like, how do I want to, if I'm going to volunteer and give away my precious time, I want to give it away to an organization that I believe in, that believes in me.
Yeah.
We share similar vibes, we share similar culture. I want to be part of that culture. And so for profit, nonprofit, startup, whatever it is, brand culture and internal culture and making sure that that comes out, whether it's through in your about page or through your social media or whatever it is equally important as the mission that you're actually trying to achieve. Because without your people, you can't achieve your mission.
It's quite an undertaking to define what you want that culture to look like and then kind of backfilling with your brand because I think some people think that's just organic and then their logo or their colors need to reflect what that is. And
Right.
what I have found starting this firm, almost 10 years in now, like it has to be a very, very intentional effort. And I think
Yeah.
that's also where the nonprofit community has it, especially complicated because I've sat in on several conversations when organizations try to rebrand, and anyone listening is just gonna sigh at how just exhausting that process is when you get all of the stakeholders in the room and you run it through the board and we have 2 weeks worth of conversations about what shade of purple we should use, and it's on and on and on and on. But it's so much deeper than, for me, like a style guide that includes, the SKUs of the colors and the website. It's kind of starting with, who do we want to be, what culture do we want to have, what do we need to change internally to better live into that culture, and then how do we align the brand with whatever that culture is. And it's a continuous process that I think is always evolving and growing.
Mhm.
It's not really like, oh, we want to do this thing and then we never actually put anything in motion to do it. And I think a lot of times people think of branding as simply just like a refresh of the logo or something to that effect. But like I said, I think the nonprofit community has a especially tricky, because me, if I wanted to change like the brand of the charity CFO, I just, run that through myself and decide that's what we're going to do. In the nonprofit world, it's such a sensitive process to go through, like you said, your team, your staff, maybe various members of leadership that have a stake in different
Correct.
programs and what we're going to say about those programs. And then, of course, your board or any committees or maybe key stakeholders on the donor side, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera, goes on and on and on. So it's really tricky, I think,
It,
to do
it's
that.
it's
But it's
it's
not just a logo refresh, and it
no,
takes a
no.
lot of intentional effort.
I, as a branding professional, I wouldn't be doing my tribe service if I didn't go on a podcast and say a brand is not your logo.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
it's the inside joke amongst all of us branders, right? Because everyone thinks that your brand is your logo. It's not. It's just a
Yeah.
visual representation of your organization. And at the end of the day, what matters more is how you live it and how
Mm.
how you put it out there. And to some degree, Tasha, it's like, again, not even sometimes not even about the organizations. It's about the people out in the community, how they represent the brand. Going back to brand
Mhm.
culture, right? That is a
Mhm.
direct representation of brand culture, right there. It's what's happening, in the field or in the wild, as we might say. Um, I I have success stories and I have failure stories around dealing with boards. I've
Mhm.
dealt with boards where I would love to have stuck a dull spoon into my eye. I'm just going to be
Mhm.
completely honest. But I've worked with boards where, from the very get go, we were so intentional about how we all need to be aligned
Mhm.
and the expectations and the roles that we all play. And
Mhm.
oftentimes that is the biggest differentiator, right? You're always going to have the naysayers. You're always going to have people who don't want change, right?
Mhm.
You're always going to have that. You're never going to get away from that. I think it's a matter of coming back to this idea of authority and empathy. Listen, I've done hundreds of branding projects and I've gone through them on the client side when I was the client at times. I understand what we're doing here. I understand the reverberations and the magnitude of what we're trying to achieve here. But I think then when you can trust the process and you can have the right guide, again, right? When you have the right guide
Mhm.
to guide you through this process, you'll find that what we put out there is going to resonate, it's going to work, and it's going to help set the tone for the next 20, 30, 40 years in some instances. So, there's a good amount of blind faith that goes into it. But again, if your gut feeling is saying something's wrong with the organization, like we're just something's not clicking,
Yeah.
that is the biggest telltale sign of we need to have an introspective conversation, to ourselves. Socrates said it, know thyself, right? And like, it's really important that every organization does this. And branding
Mhm.
isn't a one time, we did it, we're done. I
Right.
mean, I often equate it to fashion.
Yeah.
I have a hat. I have a lot of these hats. I have a lot of different hats. I don't just buy one hat and wear that, forever. I don't have just one pair of jeans or one pair of sneakers, right?
Mhm.
Like that's not how it goes, And so,
Mhm.
you had mentioned earlier something about guidelines, and I think that there's also a misconception, right? Like around this notion of guidelines. I actually think that the day of brand guidelines are past us.
Oh.
these rigid documents that, if you draw outside the lines, we're gonna, shame on you. The brand police is gonna pick you up and throw you into prison. To some regard, we need to be consistent and we need to stay within the system. But that's exactly what it is. It's an operating system for your organization. That's what the new idea brand guidelines are, because it's not just logo usage and your color hex tones. It's how do we talk in different voice, tone, our
Hmm.
mission, our vision? Do we have any reasons to believe, as we might say?
Hmm.
What's our brand ethos? Do we have a manifesto? But what
Hmm.
about social? How do we show up on social? I mean, we can only
Hmm.
police it so much, and if someone creates content on our behalf, which is what we want, how do we deal with that? Like there are all these nuances now that go into branding, because it's not just a website, a business card, and like a print ad. There are
Right.
thousands of places your brand is going to show up. And all we can do is ensure that we have achieved some level of consistency across all those channels. This is why I use the idea of the operating system. A brilliant example would be like the New York Philharmonic, right? Of course, they have a huge operating budget. They're backed by some of the biggest philanthropic givers and donors, in the city of New York, but they've done a brilliant job at allowing their brand the place, the time and space to breathe, the
Mm.
time and space to be able to take on take on a life of its own, which is what you want the brand to do. Some of the biggest for-profit brands do this, right? Think about
Hmm.
Nike as an example, or even think about Spotify. If we're
Mm.
all familiar with Spotify, you go onto the Spotify app and you could tell it's Spotify, but it's not like one color scheme or one logo. There's a million different variations, and it works for them. Now, again, extreme examples, not, your small little nonprofit that has $1 million operating budget, per year or even less. Obviously you're not going to go and blow out the brand like Spotify does. But I think it's just taking that level of thinking of like, okay, we need to build a brand that is relevant, that resonates, that sounds right, that is flexible. Again, a
Hmm.
small little icon on Instagram versus a giant billboard, it's got to work in these different scenarios. And I think unfortunately, there's a lot of nonprofits going back to what we said in the beginning about the 1990s. There's a lot of these nonprofits that are just not thinking like that. They're thinking too archaic, and they're not necessarily thinking future forward. And we haven't
Yeah.
even touched upon AI, but that's a
Right.
whole other part too that we should probably do, because the
Yeah.
implications AI has on your marketing department and on your brand is tremendously huge, and we
Yeah.
can't overlook it. So like, it's a really interesting time, and now is the time to take hold of your organization before the robots do, and then we might truly be out of time.
They're
You know
on
what
their
I mean?
way. Well, and that's what I want to talk about too, because, sometimes marketing is such a big concept, and a lot of times we can really just go on and on and on with conversations about theory. And I know as the person that sits usually in the budget conversations with organizations, I think every leader knows they need to do more marketing or better marketing, whether that includes branding, but usually that's the case. Building awareness, right? Marketing for the benefit of building awareness and obviously donors and things like that. So it's like no nonprofit leader is like, we should do less marketing. No one says that. It's always more, but then there's the reality that time after time after time after time, I see that the initial draft of the budget includes some element of marketing expense, right? And that's usually one of the first things that gets cut. I don't think that's unique completely to the nonprofit world, but the reality is, everybody wants it. They don't necessarily know how to do it. They don't really have a lot of money to do it. Or at least that's, like I said, the first thing that gets cut out of most organizations. So I guess really my question to you, not even smaller organizations with the assumption that they have a small budget, but I think all organizations, even middle market organizations, have a very small budget for marketing. And maybe listening to this podcast, they realize, oh, we've got some things we need to work on. But what are the first three things that an organization should do to start exploring this concept of, do we need to improve our brand? Um, where would they begin?
I mean, call me and let's do a brand review. I mean,
Mhm.
that's one, two, and three right there. Um, Tongue in cheek, getting having an expert come in to assess your organization is really, really key, right? a lot of organizations are like, oh, well, my cousin did the logo and my daughter's doing the social media, and there's a lot of, and they think they're showing up, which they are, but they might be showing up wrong. So I think, having that it's like going to the doctor. Okay. Like, yes, you can go on AI and take a photo and put your symptoms in there, and maybe it gets it right, maybe it doesn't.
Mhm.
But like you need to sometimes go to the doctor and, get your labs run.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, like, is your website performing as it should,
Mm,
or are they going to your donate page and they are abandoning cart, as we might say?
mm, mhm,
That's a huge effing problem if that's happening,
mhm,
right? Whether you're
mhm,
selling a
mhm,
product or trying to get a donation, like, you need to make sure that your user experience is spot on. You need to make sure that, again, you are not jarring with your words, or you're not turning people off because you think you're doing a good job with marketing, but from a professional perspective, these are things that we can improve on. So I don't think that I think that organizations need to, and it doesn't have, and I think part of the fear, to be quite honest, I think part of the fear, the word rebrand needs to get rebranded, because that's fear inducing. It means we need to redo whatever we've done. Nine
mhm,
times out of 10, we're not redoing what you've already done. We are evolving it. It truly is an evolution. So sometimes on the spectrum, I might be talking to an organization. We go from evolution to revolution, right? A revolution is name change. The whole organization is going to get flipped upside down. Everything is going to be different. That's very far and few between. That's seldom that actually happens. What
mhm.
usually happens is it's an evolved logo, it's an evolved message, it's an evolved website. We're building off of what we already have. So I don't think that, like, by going and having a brand review done, or a brand audit, or whatever you want to call it, isn't going to always necessarily mean that we are going to be, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to go on my previous comment. It might just mean, like, we need to make small tweaks or
Mhm.
small considerations, or just let's just change the messaging. Your logo's fine,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't need to be different, but you need a different value prop. You need to lead with, a different message. And I think that little step, that 0 to 1 right there, can be sometimes a tremendous multiplier in difference. But we wouldn't
Mhm.
know that unless you had that outside perspective who can look at your organization top down, bottom up, from a 50,000-foot perspective, to give you those recommendations.
Okay. So outside perspective, anything else that an organization maybe can do before or initially?
Oh, sure, sure, sure. Um, Talk to your people,
Mm,
ask them.
mm,
We have two ears and one mouth for a reason, right? Act
yeah.
accordingly. Like, brands,
Yeah.
I think sometimes we ran a survey 4 quarters ago. No, run a survey every week, every month, whatever it is, incentivize the survey, right? Sure.
Hmm.
We see this a lot in the e-commerce space, right? And I'm gonna give you the equation in a second. The e-commerce space, you might see a brand that always on the bottom of their emails has take our survey, right? Win a
Hmm.
$50 gift card, whatever it is, right? They're doing that because you are telling the brand how you want to be marketed to, the kind of content you want to consume, what products you would buy, what product they should get rid of, et cetera, et cetera. You're giving the
Mm,
brand the answers, because the brand is not what you say it is. The brand is what they say it is. So have them tell
right.
you what it is. So in the nonprofit space, it's the same thing. Ask them, are we communicating to you properly? What kind of content would you like to see? If we started a podcast, would you listen to the podcast? Are there services that you would like to get from us that we don't offer? Are there
Mm,
services that you don't think that we should offer? Like, ask these questions, not just one time, but make it part of the culture, right?
mm,
Make it part of the culture to continuously listen, because the more that you can listen to your people, again, everything from the donors to the employees to the funders to the people you serve, anyone within your community, they're going to tell you those answers, right? And then once
sure.
you have that answer, once you have that qualitative data, then you can start to see the patterns.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone is saying that they find our website really hard to navigate. I wonder what we should do. Oh, we should
Yeah.
probably do social media. Wrong.
Right.
They're
Right.
telling you the answers. So
Hmm.
between having an expert review the organization and asking your people, it should be really concrete, your next steps. Then
Gotcha.
you have to just find the funding. We work with a lot of nonprofits where they get a grant or they are somehow able to wrap up a branding initiative within a grant.
Sure.
And that is absolutely what we should be looking to do here. Also, just one other caveat, I'd be remiss not to say this, in the political environment in which we live in, you cannot be dependent on grants. So
Hmm.
most organizations, what, 80-20, eighty
Yeah.
twenty grant versus private. You need to put a brand together that attracts the private because you
Mm.
cannot be depending on any other any other governmental agency in this day and age to give you what you need. You need to get it from the private sector, right? And that private sector is gonna, you had mentioned brand awareness earlier,
Sure.
right? As your big marketing
Hmm.
top funnel, right? Your big marketing
Hmm.
play right there. That top funnel awareness is branding. Like that is exactly what it is. So that's another huge reason why, and I'm seeing an influx of business. We have a
Hmm.
lot of nonprofits reaching out to us because they're scared. They're scared that their
Hmm.
funding is going to get cut. So the answer to the cutting of government funding is the
Hmm.
private sector, whether
Sure.
that's from corporations or just from donors in general. And the only way to get the way that you're going to reach them is through marketing and through having a brand that attracts and not repels.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with that. Definitely shift to individual donors. I know we're running out of time because I want to leave a little bit of time to figure out how to connect with you if people, want to do
Sure.
this, kind of 30,000 foot view. And I guess I would add from my experience for those listening, like the next step, I think just, doing a little hypothesis and check. This is something that I did that I thought was kind of interesting. Um, we talked about AI a little bit, but if you're wondering what someone else might think about what your website says and or you want to mirror back, I recently am in the middle of kind of refreshing some of the copy on my website, and I didn't initially write it, but I'm curious to know, like, does this jive with what I want our brand to say, the voice that I want it to have, right? And I was able to copy and paste a lot of that content into even just ChatGPT and you know, ask it questions, right? How would you summarize this brand? Like, what is the reading level in which this brand is speaking? Like, who do you think this would appeal to? Where are there holes in my messaging? If you are not able to, if you're like super, super tiny and you only have a couple people that maybe work with your organization, whether they're volunteers or employees, and you don't, maybe you wrote it all in your, you can't see the forest through the trees, if you will, use AI to kind of give you at least a temperature check on where you're at, because it was really fascinating to me at times when I've done that it had completely different perspective than what my intention was. So I think that's a really low lift way to start building a little insights to, if you have a hunch that maybe things are a little outdated or maybe your messaging isn't on track with what you had intended, that might be a very simple, very low cost, like, all right, then no, that I needed some validation, then I need to pick up the phone and call the professional like Steven. But that's something that I've absolutely leveraged in the past and has been really insightful. So
Oh
anyway,
yeah.
throw that little tip out there.
No, using AI for a temperature check is key. I think it's got to be taken with a grain of salt. It's not
Yeah.
gospel. AI is going to get things wrong, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
subjectivities that it doesn't know.
Yeah.
But from our organization, we are early adopters into creating our own GPTs. We have our
Hmm.
own AI models that we have basically enlisted data scientists to help us build out because it's going to allow us to work with organizations better, right? At the end of the
Hmm.
day, AI is just another tool, but
Sure.
it takes a human being to think, to connect the dots, to see which dots,
Right.
are right and which dots are wrong. So, we don't shy away from it. And if anything, we encourage, we've done a lot of training with nonprofits on how your marketing team could be more impactful using an AI tool set. Because
Hmm.
I think that's the future, right? Like we cannot shy away from it. We can't be
Right.
naive to the
It's
impact.
here.
Like it's here and I love it. And it's sure there are some scary moments but like I think at the end of the day, if you know how to use it and you use it for the benefit of good and you use it for in a way that's responsible, because there's a lot of irresponsibility in AI, and let's not even talk about the sustainability efforts around AI. It
Hmm.
takes a lot of power, a lot of waste that comes from it. But if you use AI the right way, it could absolutely be a superpower for your marketing, but it's not going to replace it, right? It's not
Right.
going to do all
Gonna
that. So,
help.
but we can have a whole nother conversation on AI, Tasha, because
Exactly.
I have a lot of opinions and points of view on this.
There's a lot. There's a lot of information out there on that. So, well, Stephen, we unfortunately are kind of out of time to talk about this, although I could talk about this all day long. But I know there are organizations that tuned in to get some more insights on branding. It's probably something they're struggling with, and maybe some of the reasons that you
Sure.
talked about earlier. The preparation of knowing that there's shifts continuing to happen within funding, and we need to get more and more awareness out there. And
Yeah.
branding, as you said, is a strong ticket to having success in that area. For people that are looking to get some more support or have conversations with a professional to give them that mirrored reflection on like what's really going on with my brand, what is the best way to get in touch with you, follow you on social media or website? What's the best way to get connected?
Sure, sure. My agency, A New Brand, you can go to a newbrand.co.
Hmm.
Very simple. My personal website is stevenpicanza.com, and that is a portal to, um, I do the Branders Magazine podcast, and I'm a partner with them. I teach at 3 universities, one in Europe, two here in America, all on branding and marketing. And it's where all my content lives. It's where a lot of my stuff, the home, I suppose you could say. So those are my two URLs. And then on
Okay.
social, I'm predominantly I'm a LinkedIn guy. Uh,
Okay.
Obviously, with social media, and this is my last tip, right? I think too many organizations get paralyzed thinking they need to be everywhere when I think we need to
Hmm.
understand where our audience is and just really show up there. If your
Yeah.
nonprofit is not going after Gen Z, don't be on TikTok.
Right.
Be where they are, right? Go where your people are. Don't think that it's a shiny, bright new object. You need to start posting reels or whatever it is. Like, don't do that. So you might not find me anywhere else, but on LinkedIn, I'm posting really consistently and valuable content. And I do have a weekly newsletter that goes out to about 8,000 or so nonprofit leaders and business
Okay.
leaders around the world. And you can find that on Substack as well. Just type in my name, Google my name. I'm the only one. I am the only one on the planet with my name, and just Google it, and you'll just or you can put me into ChatGPT, see what happens. Roll the
Okay.
dice.
There we go. And we'll link some of those in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. This has
Yeah.
been a fun conversation, and you all that are listening, you know what I'm going to say. Subscribe or engage in some way so the meta world can help other nonprofit leaders like yourself find content like this. I'm excited to continue helping modern nonprofit leaders find solutions to their storytelling or branding or operational needs. So stay tuned for future episodes. Thank you all again for listening. See you next time.